Изборите во Германија завршија со тесна победа. Социјалдемократите слават, партијата на германската канцеларка Ангела Меркел, ЦДУ, доби историски најслаби резултати. И двете големи партии сакаат нова влада до Божики. Во следното интервју разговараме со Бодо Вебер, германски аналитичар од Центарот за политики на демократизација. Господин Вебер, социјалдемократите имаат тесна победа, но и двете големи партии, СПД и ЦДУ, се во игра за формирање нова влада. Какви коалиции се очекуваат?
Well, yes, we have seen a narrow win by the Social Democrats and the worst outcome election result for the conservative CDU, the party of outgoing Chancellor Merkel in its entire history. However, none of the party can form a coalition with a clear dominant role of either SPD or CDU. So there are basically theoretically three coalition options left. One would be the continuation of the less loved Grand Coalition, this time under this SDP leadership, which is not very much expected. So there basically remains only a coalition with the two smaller parties that are coming out third and fourth, the Greens and the Liberals, the FDP. So either a coalition, so-called Jamaica coalition between the CDU and the two parties, or so-called traffic light coalition, Ampelkoalition, between the winning Social Democrats and the Greens and the Liberals.
На овие избори зелените и либералите се клучни за нова влада. Колку разликите во нивните политики ќе влијаат во одлучувањето на социјалдемократите и демохристијаните?
Yes, very much, because as you already noted in your question, the biggest political programmatic differences among all the four potential parties that could form a coalition are between those two smaller parties, the Greens and the Liberals, particularly on a question of finance policy, but also in the way of how to manage climate crisis. The Liberals are more economically a neoliberal party, so they don't want to finance key challenges through taxes and raising revenues. They want to lower taxes and at the same time have more investments and have this general approach of that the market regulates many of these tasks. So yeah, I mean, we saw something very unusual in German history, that first the small parties started to negotiate to see how they can bridge their differences. Also as a lesson learned to previous negotiations over Jamaica coalition after the previous elections, when after months of negotiations in a surprise move, the Liberals checked out of those negotiations and Germany ended up with another grand coalition. So and something that cost the Liberals a lot of support afterwards. So this time, in a way, both parties, the Greens that finally want to govern, and the Liberals that have this lesson learned from previous negotiations, are really seem to be keen to not, end up without an agreement of bridging their difference, a compromise that will enable them to find a third partner among the two big parties, while of course, in a way, the Greens would rather have the Social Democrats as partners, and the Liberals are generally more leaning towards traditionally the CDU.
Кандидатот за канцелар на социјалдемократите Олаф Шолц го споредуваат со Ангела Меркел. Дури кампањата беше фокусирана на него како личност. Го направи и познатиот символ со рацете како Меркел. Дали германците во Шолц ја гледаат стабилноста на Меркел?
Yes, this was very interesting, the campaign. Merkel, who governed for 15 years, and at each elections, the Social Democrats, who were very often the more active part of the governing coalition, their ministers were more active, had more results. They experienced a permanent decline despite in these 12 years of grand coalition because of the so-called kanzler bonus. That means that the bonus of the chancellor, who was really, the dominant political figure in German political life for a decade and a half, for her managerial skills, for her leadership, managing her crisis manager skills that really helped Germany maneuver through times of crisis, and only Germany, staying stable and prosperous. So in a way, all three candidates try to portray themselves, CDU candidate Laschet, Mr. Scholz, and the Green candidate, the female one, Annalena Baerbock, in this line, in this tradition of, stability and continuity. And in a way, at this election, this bonus shifted towards Mr. Scholz as the coalition partner, as the finance minister for many years in Ms. Merkel's government. So he, in a way, the success of the Social Democrats is to a large degree due to that the Social Democrats did not make many mistakes in the campaign, less than the two other candidates. B, that they managed to show internal coherence and unity, unlike the CDU that was really divided. And C, because Mr. Scholz really managed to portray himself as the true successor of Ms. Merkel, as the guarantor of stability and prosperity.
Какви политики може да се очекуваат од новата германска влада во однос на ЕУ и наметнувањето на Франција како нов водач по заменувањето на Меркел?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, that to a large degree depends on whether we'll see the Social Democrats, or to a certain degree, or the CDU leading the future ruling coalition. In the campaign, interestingly, that was both dominated on the one hand by this issue of continuity, which were pretty much emptied of any political content, and on the other side by the all-dominating topic of climate change, particularly after the disastrous floods we have seen in Germany in the summer. There was very little to almost no room in the campaign for European politics and for international politics. So what we'll see now is that really it depends on who will be the future chancellor. Will it be Mr. Laschet or somebody else from the CDU, CSU, or will it be Mr. Scholz? Of course, a new chancellor will not immediately have the same posture and power and standing within the EU as Ms. Merkel has gained over 15 years. But definitely, I don't think that Mr. Macron, who would like to succeed that role, Ms. Merkel in that role in the EU, will also not manage in case he survives the next presidential elections next year. Germany will try to play and continue to play a crucial role. Now, this relationship between France and Germany, also in the context of the Balkan and enlargement politics, where Mr. Macron generally is against enlargement, will be crucial for the future of the Germany standing and the future of the EU. Mr. Macron has risen to his position as the great reformer, announcing great internal reforms of the EU and making proposals of structural reforms. Ms. Merkel did not provide any proposal on internal reform, instead preventing Mr. Macron. That really soured the relationship. So now it really depends on who will be the new chancellor. CDU under Laschet remains reluctant of structural reforms, while the Social Democrats, together with the Greens, are very much open to more structural reforms, including, on question of joint debt policy, and what we have seen in the context of the relief package for the COVID pandemic.
Каква политика може да се очекува во однос на Русија и Кина? Зелените, кои се клучен играч за нова влада, се прилично тврди во своите ставови во однос на овие две земји.
Yes, I mean, we have seen in the past that there's quite some unity between, interestingly, the conservatives, the CDU, and the Greens when it comes to a tough position towards Russia. A little bit different on China, where the CDU was more on, economic trade interest position. In a way, Ms. Merkel undermining a tougher EU position towards China. So it will depend really who will run the next government. If we should get a Jamaica coalition with the CDU, the lesser likely option currently these days, then we could see a continuation, even a toughening of the position, German positioning towards Russia, and probably also a toughening towards China. In case of the Social Democrats, it will be very hard to predict what will come, because a substantial portion of the Social Democrats, maybe not Mr. Scholz himself, a fraction of the Social Democrats traditionally are more benign towards Russia. There's this terminology or term of Russlandversteher, the ones that understand Russia, so very being softer on Russia, which really is a problematic position concerning the Russian policy under Putin. So it really depends. As I said, if should there be Social Democrats forming the government, there could be some tensions and clashes between Social Democrats and the Greens, and also the Liberals. Should there be a government formed without the Social Democrats, it will definitely be a tougher position on Russia.
Што очекуваат германците од новата германска влада на внатрешно-политички план?
Well, that's very hard to predict. In a way, this election rise, this U-turn of the polls from spring, when the Greens were close to or in parts of the polls were on place one, were leading the polls ahead of the CDU, and the only coalition options seem to be a green-black or a black-green government, and the Social Democrats were nowhere to be seen. This rise of the Social Democrats really showed that the Germans, or to a large degree, expect continuity of stability and of prosperity, not so much having to deal with major political issues and contents and political debates, serious strategic debates. On the other hand, the second dominating topic, climate change, really is something where at least a larger part of Germans expects substantial changes and a more resolute policy and reform and transformation of our economy and industry than what Merkel succeeded or managed to do during her 15 years, despite once having been called the climate chancellor.